Welcome to episode 1 of Based Kamp Podcast. This is a podcast where we will pursue truth with no concern for where it might lead. Truth is our objective. This is a space for good faith conversations. We're not here to elevate or propagate particular political ideologies or parties. There are other places that do that. They want you to believe a certain way, think a certain way. All I care about is what is actually true. And I do believe that we can find truth. So that is the driving principle in what we do here. The name is derived from a couple of different inspirations. And the first is the events of this past week, the passing of Charlie Kirk. I wanted to allude to the influence he has had on myself. This podcast would not exist if that had not happened, if he had not lived the life he did. And so this is a subtle nod to his influence. Camp has a K on it in 1776. Secondly, a base camp. In every situation, a base camp is a place that you establish in order to explore the unknown. And so we want this to be that, a safe haven as you go out and explore the unknown, for anyone and everyone to come in good faith and have real conversation, real dialogue, and pursue truth together. Thirdly, based. It's a word that I particularly am fond of. Also, the word itself is an authentic, unapologetic expression of truth, regardless of consequences, regardless of how it might make somebody feel or react. That truth is authentically, unapologetically expressed. And that is the purpose of this podcast existing. We see what can be accomplished, particularly in the life of Charlie Kirk. He made that choice every day to express what he believed to be true, no matter the cost, no matter how it made people feel. And I think that's a big factor in today's world. Something that a lot of people feel is they don't have choice, which is just not true. Very, very few people on this planet do not have the agency of choice. Doesn't mean you have very difficult choices, but ultimately we do have choice, no matter your age. And I know that can be difficult to hear, particularly if you're like a middle schooler or high schooler, and you're like, well, I have parents. And I think another big lie that can be believed is that parents can put sort of their emotional well-being onto you as a kid. And I just want you to know, like, you're not responsible for your parents' emotional well-being. No one is responsible for another person's emotional well-being. So what I say, what I think, and what I do is solely my responsibility. I am not concerned with how it makes you feel. I'm not concerned with your emotional or mental well-being. That's your responsibility. Each person is solely responsible for their mental, emotional well-being. Now, I am responsible for communicating in a way that is respectful, that is honorable, that is helpful in that pursuit of the truth. But what drives my communication should not be the emotional response that it will elicit from another person. And I think that is where a lot of the current narrative goes wrong, is people don't say things because they believe they're true. They say things they want to get a response out of somebody. And I think one more thing too that I just want to say to youth, as we've looked at, like, that's what Charlie dedicated so much of his life to. You know, there is a verse in Scripture, and if Scripture is not really your thing, I get it, but I think there's still value in what was written. And it's an older gentleman writing to a young man who's trying to figure out sort of his place in society and as a leader and what that looks like. And he writes a letter to this guy. His name's Timothy. He says, Timothy, don't let anyone despise you because you're young. Instead, be an example in everything you do. And so I think, especially right now, this is an opportunity, regardless of your age, especially if you're young. Like, don't let the weight of the cultural moment make you feel like you can be cast aside, looked down on. But this is precisely a time when you have an opportunity to step up and be an example in everything you do. Let's get into it. And really, first on my heart today and what I want to talk about is I think a lot of us have been seeing these reactions to what happened to Charlie Kirk this past week. And there's a couple different responses I've seen and that I want to address. And what I found particularly astounding and saddening is the need people feel to do a couple things when making statements regarding his assassination. First, is clarifying that they shared little or none of his beliefs, as if to signify some personal virtuousness into the ether. Because all of a sudden, grieving at an innocent man being murdered in cold blood in front of his family and thousands of onlookers is no longer something we can universally and unequivocally condemn as a society. I'd be devastated if such a thing happened to a man wanted by the law for crimes committed. There is no place in a free and just and civil society for the cold-blooded, murderous execution of a human being, point blank, period, regardless of who they are or what they have done. And anyone who minimizes or makes light of such an event is one of two things. You're either mentally deranged or entirely evil. These are the only two options. You either are deeply mentally disturbed and need professional medical help, and I would encourage you to get that if that is you. Or you are pathologically evil and you need prayer. What you cannot do with these people is meaningfully engage them in conversation. You cannot meaningfully engage someone who is mentally ill, and you cannot meaningfully engage someone who is pathologically evil. You cannot argue with them. So there is a sector of society responding to these events. This simply cannot be argued with. There's no amount of information they can be given, no amount of facts that can be presented that will change the way they respond, because they're either mentally ill or just pathologically evil. And the second response that's troubled me is people saying, I condemn this, but. There should be no but. If there is a but, you do not actually condemn what happened. You aren't actually grieved by the state of our nation, the climate of our culture, and the death of an innocent man. Back in 2020, when things were getting real intense with riots, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and others dying, I can't tell you how many texts I sent to friends telling them that my heart was grieved by what I was seeing, and if they needed anything from me, I was there for them. Because this was not a time for me to share my political take on the emotions that they were feeling, on the things that were happening in front of our eyes. It was a time to come alongside and walk with people through real pain and real grief. I didn't take it as an opportunity to say, but white people are actually killed more by police, so this isn't a big deal. That would have been grievously callous of me and contributed nothing positive to the conversation, regardless of how true what I was saying was. Minimizing the real pain people feel to make a point about data and political ideology is gross and inhumane. The fact we live in a time where it seems the overwhelming majority of people feel this need to make a point, no matter the circumstance or situation, and fail to have the capacity to just sit with people in pain and to grief is another tragedy all on its own. We have a whole podcast just on that sentence alone. We must once again learn what it is to be human, what it is to be kind, what it is to bear the burdens of another, what it is to have a compassionate heart, and what it is to be a decent person. Finally, the response that excuses their behavior with sentiments, well, Charlie always had hot takes, and he never stood down from terrible moments. First, please show me a clip where he minimized or mocked or slandered someone's death. Secondly, if Charlie is this awful human being that you claim he is, why in the world would you be pointing to him as an excuse for your own behavior? If he is so terrible and awful, why is he someone then you are using to justify what you're doing? This makes no sense. The complete lack of critical thinking and logic we see from so many today is troubling in its own right. To say with a straight face, I hate this person's behavior, so I'm going to do the exact same thing I scream about them doing, and then use them as a reason why my behavior is acceptable, is a truly unhinged take. Like, this is beyond insane. And I have seen literally dozens of people do this. Oh, Charlie did it, so it's perfectly fine for me to do it too. Which, by the way, Charlie did not. Like, there is no evidence whatsoever of Charlie doing anything people are claiming he is doing. But just for the sake of argument, to say that he did does not then allow you to then go and do the things if you're condemning what he did. Like, that is peak hypocrisy. And this goes for everybody, not just Charlie Kirk. I see people on the right do it too, using, well, because the left speaks this way, we get to then respond to them the same way. And this creates the endless cycle that we find ourselves in now. Something has to change. It really bothers me, the using the person who you're celebrating to justify what you're doing. Because it's just, if you want to be logical in your critique, that's fine. Like, we can have disagreement, but you can't have disagreement with someone who doesn't even have a framework that makes sense that they're arguing from. And I think so much of the conversation today is precisely that.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest problems that we have today is the emotional reaction. You know, when you're emotional, you can't think straight. And so many people have a hard time controlling their emotions and even knowing what they're feeling. So many people are just told what they're feeling or what they should be feeling instead of sitting down and knowing exactly what is happening within their own body or within their own thought process or mindset. And, you know, I think one of the things that we need to get to is a place where we can sit down, hear something hard, test it, see if it is true or not, discern that, and then make a change if it's necessary. I think so many people don't want to admit they're wrong. They would rather lash out rather than take a small loss for a much bigger win.
And we see this a lot of times with the conversations Charlie would have with students, is when they started to talk, they would realize, oh, I don't actually have a framework that I'm talking from. I just am reacting to what I'm hearing or what I'm seeing, but I'm actually thinking critically about what's being said and then developing in myself an understanding of the issue and having a worldview with which I can actually engage meaningfully a topic, conversation, policy, whatever. And when that happens, you're not going to go anywhere productive because it's just purely reactionary. And when everybody is reacting to everybody and no one's actually sitting down and thoughtfully engaging with a topic, there's not anything productive that can come. The culture that we are in is so unforgiving, and so it's like you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. If you stick to your guns, people are going to criticize you and hate on you and drag your name. And if you admit, you know what? I've thought about this and I actually realized I wasn't completely right. Then it's like, oh, you're a flip-flop. You don't have conviction. You don't know what you believe. And there's no space for humanity anymore. And that's why I said we need to learn again what it is to be human. Because we don't actually have a culture and a society that allows people to to be human.
I think it's a really interesting point that in order to have truth, in order to have nothing but truth, you also have to have grace. I think they both work hand in hand. They almost seem like they don't go together, but they are the perfect partners.
We need to make saying I was wrong something to be celebrated, not something to be condemned or looked down upon, or the person who says that is lesser than. The person who's able to look into a camera, hold a microphone, and say genuinely, you know what, I was wrong about this, and now this is what I believe, that person should be celebrated. And it's interesting because I do think, not to get overtly political here, although that will inevitably happen, but the cultures that we see politically on the right allows far more space for that to happen. And there's actually an interesting data point that came out recently that showed the right versus left and clusters of belief sets that were held on each side. And the clusters on the left were very, very small. Like there's very little variance between the beliefs held, whereas the clusters on the right were insanely spread out, which just shows one culture allows for exploring belief, and the other is cult-like in its beliefs and allows little to no variance. And it is ironic, the side that is cult-like is the side accusing the other of being a cult. Again, I'll leave it at that, but when we don't have space for conversation, we don't have space for exploration of truth, then people are going to A, either be afraid to speak out, or B, just allow others to do the thinking for them and just regurgitate whatever they're told they're supposed to think. And neither are helpful, and both lead to bad places. The other thought that I had has been floating, I was like there and gone, and I grabbed hold of it, is I think, and where Based Kamp is going to be decidedly different, is I do not care about aligning myself or anything here with any particular political ideology or party, regardless of the outcome. And I think a lot of people will either hold themselves back from saying something that they might know is true because they feel like it looks what they believe, it makes what they believe look bad, or people who they support look bad. It's just like, well, let me find a way that I can maybe misconstrue this or convolute it so it actually makes us look good. And you see this done particularly with data, where people will cherry pick particular data points in order to prove their position, while intentionally, or maybe not to describe everyone malicious intent, maybe unknowingly omitting the data that disproves the very point they're trying to prove. And so that's something that I want to very intentionally make sure we do not do here, that we take all the data into account when we make a point, that we are not just spewing out crazy hot takes, but that this is a data-driven, factually formed opinion being shared. And if we aren't able to do that, then we can't really truly progress.
Next topic, chemtrails.
Chemtrail. I think this is a perfect time to do our word of the week, which is racism.
Ooh, that's a good one.
It's a great word. It's a word being thrown around a lot right now. It's a word that Charlie Kirk has been accused of being a racist. And so I just wanted to look at first the definition, because a lot of people use words these days and they're not actually able to define them. What is a woman?
What is a woman?
That's a stupid question, dude.
So, racism. The belief that race is the primary determinant of human traits and capacities, and that racial differences produce an inherent superiority of a particular race. Now, this is something Charlie Kirk has been accused of propagating. The only issue with that is Charlie Kirk very vocally, repeatedly said that race is a social construct that he does not ascribe to. Very hard to be something that you don't believe in. And I think a lot of people go around leveling this accusation at others, not because they believe it, but because they want to get a reaction out of people. And this goes to what we were saying earlier, that so much of the dialogue and conversation when it comes to the political climate in our culture today is not actually about seeking truth and finding out what is right, good, and just, but getting people to react. And when you create a reactionary climate, what can happen is what we see happening today, which is dialogue falling off, people shooting other people, school shootings, assassination attempts, and assassination. And so it is really important to understand the meanings behind the words that we use and not just start leveling words at other people because we heard someone else say it. I think if we were able to just do this one thing where nobody used words they weren't able to define, we would take a massive collective step forward in having a better social dialogue. Final little element that we want to do here on Based Kamp is we want to introduce different characters throughout history that have played an important role in the making of this nation, but who might not be familiar with or familiar to the everyday ordinary American, although given the current status of everyday ordinary Americans, I feel like we could introduce them to George Washington and people would be like, whoa, what a cool guy. However, George Washington is not this week's person of the week. It's John Jay. John Jay was the first Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court. He's also President of the Continental Congress. He orchestrated the Treaty of Paris, which is where England formally recognized the United States as a sovereign nation. He was also able to be an ambassador to Spain, where he convinced them to financially support the U.S. in its fledgling years so that it would actually have money to survive as a nation. And what he may be most known for is his contribution to the Federalist Papers. If you're unfamiliar with the Federalist Papers, I would encourage you to read those. Those are often quoted more than even the U.S. Constitution, and a lot of people will think they're quoting the Constitution when they're actually referencing the Federalist Papers. But these papers played a significant role in shaping the early understanding of what the Constitution was and how our form of government was to operate. I think more importantly, to me, another thing that was a significant part of John Jay's life is his advocacy for the abolition of slavery, not just here in the U.S., but also in Britain. And shortly after the U.S. was founded, he was an attorney in New York, and he began offering free legal advice to freed slaves, or to help them to establish themselves in this new world and also free other slaves in the U.S. And I think a common misconception that I hear regurgitated is the founding fathers were these evil, racist, hateful people, when the overwhelming majority of them saw slavery for what it was and did much within their own individual power to see it eradicated from society. But maybe my favorite quote of all from the great John Jay was his suggestion to the president that we should build a giant brass wall around the entire country to prevent the Catholics from entering.
Did it work?
It was rejected soundly. Yeah.
Got it.
Yep. But so building a wall around our country was not Trump's idea originally. Started with the first Supreme Court Justice of the United States.
What year was that?
1785.
Wow. It just seems like just yesterday. They have a school named after him in New York.
Do they really?
Yeah. Yeah. My mother attended.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. True story. I'm glad you went over John Jay because I learned something new today. And it was about John Jay.
Important figure in U.S. history.
Yeah.
And I think that for all of us, the way forward is to not just develop political talking points, but to actually understand where we came from, the people who formed and framed the nation that we exist in, the principles that they believed in, what they understood to be true about our nation and the world that our nation existed in. And from there, having a framework that you get to filter your experiences through is what's going to lead to productive dialogue, going to lead to an honest pursuit of truth, is going to lead to seeing our nation and our culture heal. Well, thank you for joining episode 1 of Based Kamp, and we'll see you next week.